All right, you are at the Church Answers podcast with Jess Rayner and Thom Rayner and special guest, the guru of church worship, of worship music, the guru who has trained and equipped so many people through books and writings and work in the local church, Mike Harland. Mike, great to have you here.
Always glad to be connected with the Rayner crew, and it's good to see Jess today, who I like seeing him on this thing. I don't usually get to see him. I have to put up with Art more than anybody else. But anyway,
Well, Jess is co-host of this now, so
that's awesome.
We've moved Jess to there. Yeah.
I feel like after the intro, maybe we could go back and dub some applause over that. Like as soon as your intro, it just felt like it needed some. I almost wanted to clap after we introduced you, Mike. It was very powerful.
I want to say also, Jess, you actually have worship leader hair. So I think it's very appropriate for us to have you on this, because I've noticed a correlation. I'm not saying causation, but there's a correlation with how high the hair is with the worship leader and what's happening. So I think you're there.
I think you just brought a bunch of listeners who download this and listen to the audio. They're going to go check out YouTube now just because they want to see what's going on with the hairstyle. So I have a barber that I literally sit down and I go, just make me look good. Just make me, because I need all the help I can get. And so he does his magic, and that's all I do. It's beautiful when you find someone that can do that for you.
Hey, Mike, what is really, really kind of neat to me is it's like father, like son. It's almost whatever way he cuts his hair. Eventually, you'll see his oldest son with that haircut too.
Oh, now that's really cool.
There's kind
of He's got a little bit slightly hairstyle than me, but yeah, he's.
Can I drop a worship nugget right off the bat?
Go for it.
And I've seen this from the platform for decades. If Dad sings, everybody in the family sings.
Didn't work in my family. They told me to shut up.
Well, Dad didn't. Were you singing?
Well, do you mean platform or congregational?
Congregation.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when I sit behind, Jess sits on the front row before he goes to preach. And if his mother is not there, she likes to sit back a little bit. But if his mother's not there, I sit right behind him. And he has asked me on more than one occasion, stop singing.
See, and Mike, I thought that's what you were talking about. That if the father, like, think of a worship leader, becomes a worship leader because he sings, then the rest of the family will sing. I'm thinking that was not my dad at all. He can't sing at all. It almost made me not want to sing.
Now, I did not say sing well. I just said sing. So,
Mike, you've been in situations where you said that I was singing. I don't know if you heard me or you saw my mouth moving.
I've got, and I let this get away from me somehow, but I had in my possession during the Lifeway years. I was interviewing you one time, and I don't remember the occasion, but they were setting you up and getting the cameras going. And I said, and of course I called you Dr. Rayner. I said, Dr. Rayner, if your life was a Beatles song, which song would it be? And I don't know if you remember this, but you started singing. And you didn't sing just one. You sang about 5, one after another. And the recording was going.
And I love it.
For a long time, I had that on my computer, but I no longer have it. But I had you singing Beatles songs. Yeah, it was awesome.
Well, all right. I'll have to try to recall which I would have said for my life, but in my life,
I remember the first one you said. You started singing "Help."
Help. I need somebody help, not just anybody help. I need someone help.
And there goes half the listeners.
All right, let's get back on here. Hey, you heard in the intro that Cheney and Associates are our sponsor. They are the accounting firm for the church. Got a meeting set up with Steve Cheney this week. Look forward to talking with him. One of the most brilliant guys I've ever known, and his company, Cheney and Associates. Man, they do accounting. They do it for 1,100 churches. That's what they do, and they do it well. So look in the show notes or just reach out to them at CheneyAssociates.com and let them know that Church Answer sent you or Rayner sent you, whatever the case may be. All right, so we are going to be talking about worship leaders. And Mike, typically when people think about worship leaders, they think about what kind of style does that person have as far as leading worship? How long are the songs? Does that person do my favorite songs? What does that person look like? Does he look like Jess, or does he look like something else? And the questions seem to be more superficial than depth. Now, tell me I'm wrong, and you can adjust it any way you want to.
Well, I wouldn't say you're wrong. I think, and this is kind of part of what I'm very passionate about doing right now in my life. I think we've set the bar too low for musicians in church for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
We almost are willing to accept whatever they bring with them as long as they're good musicians.
Mm-hmm.
And there are settings. I would never say that a church shouldn't ever just hire musicians, because there are places and occasions when that just kind of has to happen. But I would hope churches could aspire and expect more from their musicians. Certainly in the scripture, when you look at the musicians, there was a whole lot more expected than just that they were good musicians. So I don't think you're unfair at all. I think very often we describe our musicians and our worship leaders, if we want to use those terms interchangeably for this, we describe them musically. But I'm telling you, the strongest ministries I've seen are the ones that when you begin to talk about the worship leader or the chief musician, the characteristics of their pastoral skill and spiritual leadership and theological depth, and the strongest ministries start describing these people that way, because those are the things that will stand the test of time, regardless of what style trends come and go.
Yeah, Mike, we're looking at 7 characteristics of excellent worship leaders, and we're looking at this first one, which is an obvious walk with God.
Yeah.
I think, and you're talking about worship leaders, but you're also talking about musicians as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that process playing out? And I don't know, maybe if you want to go just for the worship leader, I don't know if you want to go to musicians, but how do you see that process? How does it manifest itself? How do you see it? What does that look like in a local church setting?
So I would say, think about your small group leader or your connect group leader. What are your spiritual expectations of that person? And certainly you're looking for a teaching gift. More than likely, you're looking for some theological understanding and depth, but you're also looking for a lifestyle. Not just a gifted teacher, but also a person that's passionate about serving, that you don't have to look for them when it comes time to sacrifice and give. I mean, these are total 5-tool players in the church that you want to be discipling other people. What I would say is, in the music space, we need to expect some of those same things. And the reason sometimes I'm afraid we don't often do that, is we look for the practical musical gifts, because that's what we feel like we really need in that role. And it would be nice if they were spiritually mature and theologically developed and really students of the Bible. That'd be nice to have, but if we can't find that, we will actually settle for a guy that really is good on guitar. And I want to just say, in the long run, I think that actually weakens the shepherding responsibility that the worship leader has. And I believe that. I believe the worship leader has a shepherding responsibility of the congregation. And for him to shepherd well, he's going to have to be a really good sheep himself, from the good shepherd, in order how to do that. So an obvious walk with God, I think it actually says something that we would even put that on the list. That's not implied, and I would say, I think church leaders should expect this. Now, what does that look like, to answer your question? I think in the worship leading community of your church, whether that's the band, that's the singers, if you have a choir, whatever, there should be a sense of disciple making even in that institution. I feel like they've got to do more than make music. They're there to align with the purpose of the church, and the purpose of the church is to make disciples. So I believe, this is a conviction I've had for a long time, I think every institution of the church ought to be in the business of making disciples, and ought to align with the disciple making intention for the church. Yeah. And the musicians should as well. So what does that look like in a music space? Well, it means their rehearsals take on another dynamic to them. I want to develop them musically, and I want to bring some things together musically, but I also want, even in a rehearsal setting, even in a sound check setting, and certainly in a worship leading experience of worship service, I want there to be a spiritual component and a dynamic to that community they're praying together, they're studying scripture together, they're interacting together. So I'm not saying they should replace other groups in the church for a small group, but I say there should be a spiritual dynamic even in the worship leading community of a church.
So almost instead of saying an obvious walk with God, I feel like I hear you saying a contagious walk with God.
There you go. I like that word better. Yeah,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Change my script. Hey, Mike, the primary area where I got to know you, of course, I got to know you working with you at Lifeway, so that's the place. But the primary area of ministry where I got to know you better was how you work with pastors as well as worship leaders. I know that you're doing a consultation with a church in Georgia right now. I think you've given them over a year of your time. And the reason you're there is because the pastor thinks you're normal. You're not a typical worship leader. And the pastor thinks that you can relate to him, and the pastor knows that you understand him, and you're able to interpret between him and the worship leader, and ultimately not just be an interpreter, but bring them together to put them on the same page. So it's this whole idea of when we are anybody's looking for a worship leader, how does it work that you make sure those dynamics will take place, that the pastor is truly the spiritual authority, the worship leader, if you will, and the worship leader who's on the platform, the musician, understands that? That's a big question, but I'll stop. And I know you know where to go with it.
I mean, you are scratching a spot that I've been passionate about my whole life.
I do not want to scratch you, Mike, but
I should have never said it that way.
But I understand exactly where you're going.
Oh my goodness!
Just clarity to all you viewers and on YouTube and on you listeners on your podcasting app. I do not scratch Mike. And,
no, he does not.
It is a metaphor.
I allow him to.
Is a metaphor.
Anyway, it was during my seminary years. I went to New Orleans Seminary, and I began to see in my seminary experience back then, I'm grateful to say that I think seminaries are getting better about this and are much better about this now today. But in my seminary years, the musicians kind of were isolated from the rest of the student body. They were kind of in their conservatory over there doing that thing, whatever the musicians do, and there really wasn't any engagement across the aisle, if you want to say it that way. And that bothered me then, because I felt like the call on my life was not to make music necessarily. I understood early on, and this is because I've had godly leaders and mentors in my life that helped me understand, that God had called me to something, to ministry, and that music was just the language I was using. That my calling wasn't a different calling, but I was just given an aspect of it, a language of it. So my goals, my values should line 100% align with the goals of my pastor. And if I've got an artistic goal over here that's outside and isolated from the mission of the church or from the goals of the pastor, then that conflict's going to come. There's going to be times when the values are competing with each other, and he'll serve his and I'll serve mine, and we'll be at opposition. I understood early on that I needed to align my values with his. And I would even say it this way, not to be cute about it, but just my understanding is, in the biblical model, the senior pastor is the worship leader of the church. That the responsibility of worship leading falls on his shoulders first. Now, he may use me to outsource a praise aspect of that, a music aspect of that, but my role is in fulfillment to his call. It's not that I'm not called, but his responsibility as the worship leader, and I want to make sure what I'm doing aligns completely with him. And so, if I'm going to relate to my pastor, I've got to learn his language. I've got to care what he cares about. I've got to be excited about what he's excited about and concerned about what concerns him. And so, early on in my years of serving church staff, I tried to build a relationship with the pastors of mutual trust, mutual respect, where I knew I was aligning with him and his vision and purpose for the church. And I want to tell you, worship ministry is a whole lot more fun when you're not over here creating your own ecosystem for some kind of artistic achievement. It really becomes fun when you're part of a team that's after one thing together.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate about this point, and I'm sorry if I'm going too long on it, but I believe worship ministry in a church is not two people doing two things. It's two people doing one thing on Sunday morning. And the centerpiece of that is the preaching of God's word.
Hmm.
So how do they relate to each other? And I learned along the way, I wish I could go back and do those first two churches over because I didn't know anything about this. And I made some bad mistakes because I wasn't sensitive to this. But I learned along the way that if worship ministry could become something we shared, where I had his interest, he had mine, and we could actually share in our vision for it, share even in our preparation of it. I mean, I've had several pastors I worked with through the years. I became their number one fan of their preaching ministry. And I want to know what he's studying. I want to know what he's reading. I want to know what preachers he listens to. And I'm listening to those myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm tracking with him, and I'm able to walk in and say, "Hey, Pastor, what are you going to do with Romans 14 when you get there about talking about doubtful issues?" And I mean, I just picked that scripture, but well, how are you going to handle that passage? Or, Pastor, listen to these 3 songs that I've been listening to recently. Which one of these really resonates with you? And you begin to get this trust together, that shared vision, a shared responsibility. It can be really, really, and then looking back on what God does through the correlation of those two men and those two leaders, it's one of the greatest blessings of my life is to look back on it and say, wow, look what God did through what we've been talking about.
I love this one. As a lead pastor myself, the idea of, we're looking at your second characteristic here, a joyous desire to work with and under the authority of the lead pastor. I tell my worship director all the time, I love worship music, which means I'm going to be involved in the worship ministry. And so I'm constantly looking at it. I mean, you share the perspective of the worship leader and how you lead up. Just to kind of hit the other side of this real fast, if you were telling me as a lead pastor, what can I do to lead, for lack of better words, lead down? What are the things that the lead pastor can do to help bring about this joyous desire to work together?
Well, I love what you just said, Jess, when you said, I love worship and I love the music of worship and I'm going to be engaged. And the first thing I would say to any pastor is the biggest thing you can do to help your leader win is for you to be completely engaged in what they're doing. Now, I got to say, as I've gotten older, and I do more speaking now than singing. And I don't know if that's an indictment on my singing or if that's a compliment to my speaking. I don't know which it is.
Yes.
But I do a lot, maybe it's both. I do a lot of speaking now. And as someone now sitting there with a passage in my head while the music is being experienced together, I understand the dynamic of how I may not be completely 100% engaged in a particular song just because of what God might be speaking into my spirit. But so I have more sympathy for pastors that aren't full-throated singing during the music because of what they are about to do. It's such a heavy responsibility. I get that. But engaged spiritually, engaged emotionally, part of the bride that is at worship in our local congregation. And when my pastor's inside that with me, and if I do a good job of bringing him inside it, then everybody benefits from his engagement. So, but the pastor that's indifferent to the worship, indifferent to it, actually makes my job as a worship leader harder. I have to overcome his apathy, or apparent apathy, I should say, and that makes it harder. So the first thing I would say for the lead down is for you to be totally interested and invested. I really don't necessarily need your compliments. Like I loved what you did Sunday, although that's never rebuffed. I'm glad to hear that. But I do need to know your engagement, and I do need to know that you are at least in the flow of what we're trying to do in the worship ministry. And then I want to do a good job engaging you in that as much as I can. Hey, Pastor, I know you're going to be here when we're doing our thing Tuesday night. Would you mind stopping in and just praying with our team? That'd be awesome.
That's
that
good.
I don't want to put burdens on you, but I want to put you in front of that team as whenever you can be, and allow you to give spiritual leadership to that group because of
Yeah.
how important that is to their success.
That's great. Yeah, actually, on Sunday mornings, just real quickly, we do a huddle.
I
Me
love it.
and the worship team,
Love
and
it.
we could do a quick walkthrough and quick prayer time, quick inspiration, and then we move on. So that's great. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
me
for
too.
answering that question.
So, Mike, you know that this guy here is my pastor. That
Yes.
it's at least on the screen I'm looking at is in between you and me. And I would say this about the worship leadership at the church at Spring Hill. Two of the most humble people in the
Love it.
church are the pastor and the worship leader,
Love it. Awesome.
Jess and Derek. And that is pretty rare. And I've heard more than one person in the church say that. And I was thinking about telling his mother about that, but she takes so long to compliment him on everything that I might not see her for 2 or 3 days because
Yeah.
she'd be effusively talking about it.
Yeah.
But the humility of the worship leader who has the high visibility, the humility of the pastor who has the high visibility and leadership, that is so important to the whole culture, biblical depth of the church. That's not a question, but I'm just waiting on your comment.
I'll make this comment. I mean, we're all sports fans. I love college football. It's the time of year we're watching college football. Have you ever seen a team where the head coach and the quarterback didn't like each other?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
the whole team's affected by that. And there's a dynamic and in between series and all that. And you see that more in the NFL probably. But man, that's just so awkward. Well, I tell you what, when the pastor and the lead musician are not on the same page and the communication is breaking down and the church feels it. I mean, they may not even articulate it, but they feel it. But conversely, those teams when you've seen the head coach and the quarterback and they're in lockstep and they're high-fiving on and off the field, and in the heat of the battle where they will challenge each other and yet they're both committed to each other, the team feels that, the church feels that. They feel it, they benefit from it, and it fosters unity on the whole staff when those two men or those two leaders do that to have that kind of relationship. If it's not there, it costs you more than you could imagine it's costing you. When it is there, it's worth more to you than you could ever dream it. So I would say to both of those leaders, invest in this relationship because it will be a defining characteristic of your ministry in this church.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen that in different ways throughout my years of ministry as well. I like being practical. So how would you see that? Basically, what I hear you saying is there's trust, and when there's trust between these two, there's humility, and there's willingness to let. Hey, I'm gonna my situation. I'm gonna let Derek lead here, because I have the humility, because I have the humility comes from the trust in a lot of ways, and I get that it's not exactly perfect, but it sets the tone. So what are some things then? To me, what I hear you saying is, how do you create that trust between the two that demonstrates humility? You mentioned maybe just having some meetings, getting together, anything just super practical, maybe one or two little nuggets there.
Super practical would be establishing a rhythm of communication.
Okay.
That might just be as, hey, Monday morning, 9:00, we're going to be here talking about this. That can be as formal as informal as you want it to be. But a rhythm, a cadence of communication. And then I think it's on both leaders to find the right ways to communicate. One of the things I want to do in any relationship I'm in, but particularly this relationship, is I want to be a student of that person's communication style and know when and how I need to share what and when it's going to be weighty, when it's going to be funny, having a sense of timing about that. I don't have to tell Tom Rayner about how bad it is when there's a sense of mistiming on something that's intended to be funny, but I've got a particular story in mind. You don't have to tell it, but when there's insensitivity about no, but when there's and it wasn't my fault. I want to say it again. It wasn't my fault. I tried to stop it, but when there's insensitivity or when you just totally miss that and you don't know. That can really do damage, and trust is lost at that point. So having a cadence, having a understanding, just like he mentioned the church I'm serving down in Georgia, I'm doing this from a distance, but I know that pastor's communication style, and I know when and the kinds of things that are going to be important, and the things that shouldn't be, and the things that I need to just handle, and the things that I need to involve him in. I have a sense of that. And I know I'm going to avoid Thursday morning between 8 and 12 because he's in his prayer closet, those stuff. I mean, all of those things.
Yeah.
And I learned that from a distance, but somebody that's working every day or every week with someone, you can learn that. Matter of fact, if there's somebody in their life that does a really great job of communicating with them, go to them and say, hey, what's the secret of communicating well with the pastor?
And that's the key thing is, I think I'm looking at this from a lead pastor perspective. As a lead pastor, you have to know how you like to receive communication and how you like to give communication. I've been coached on that, and I'm a weird one. I've been told that I love details, but I am also very driven. And so what I was told early on in my ministry, and for people, they won't be able to see my hands here, but I was constantly telling people to do this. So if you're listening, I was telling people to go away, but come here, go away, but come here.
Yeah.
And so basically what I found that my communication style is give me bullet points, give me details, be brief, be detailed, and then be gone. And so it's a weird dynamic, but the ones my team has been able to learn to communicate that way. And they understand when they come in, like I'll want details. And I'm like, okay, that's enough. Let's be done. And it helps that flow. And then too, I learned my staff. I learned how they like to be communicated. I learned how like they like to be taught, how they like to be praised. Each one's a little bit different. And so I think having those understandings builds that trust, which then goes back to this third characteristic. Humility is built from the perspective of highly visible position in the church.
Yeah. So, and you know what? And a worship leader has to take this very seriously, because of the visibility of the role. If your junior boy's assistant teacher is off the same page with you, it probably won't be felt forever. But if your worship leader's off the same page, everybody in the church is going to know it quickly. And so it's so critically important. I'll add this other thought that occurred to me as we were talking about it. And it takes time to do this. So if you are changing responsibilities or changing churches every 2 years, you probably never get here. This is something you build over time, and you invest, and you nurture it. You take care of it like it's a bonsai plant. I mean, it's precious to you, and you guard it at all costs. That's because good. It's too valuable to do otherwise.
You open the can of worms, Mike. We're not going to just watch the worms go. We gotta finish the story. So just probably knows. By the way, people, when I was CEO of Lifeway, and Mike knows this, when he was at Lifeway, people knew to ask Amy Jordan how to communicate with me, because Amy knew, well, you need to be there brief. You just get to the point. And he does not want a lot of details. There are 4 Rainer males in our family, in our first family, and 3 of us want brevity. 1 of us wants to talk all the time. That would be Sam.
I'm not the talker.
Yeah.
Nope. But Art and Jess and I, brevity, just real quickly. So Jess, this is the story. There was a past due book. It was actually one of the books in the commentary set that had not been done. I think it was like 17 years past due.
It was seriously. A long time.
Yeah, seriously. And so I wrote the person. I said, look, if you're not going to get it done, we're just going to move on, And everybody had this idea that a commentary took 5 years. Well, I've already found a New Testament scholar that said he'd do it in less than a year if I needed it done. And he would have done a good job on it. I think it'd been about 17 years and it had not come in. And I'd say the relationship between me and this particular author was a little bit strained. A lot of reasons for that. And he wasn't a part of Lifeway. But there was this particular day when I was doing vision casting for Lifeway in chapel. Mike was the worship leader. He almost was not after this service, but he was.
I wasn't leading this service. I was not leading this service.
You weren't?
No, I wasn't.
I remember
I was on the front row. I was on the front row.
I remember you putting your head down. But Jess, I poured my heart out, and I was passionate, and I was talking about what God was going to do. And I thought there was a song that was going to come up, so I just sat down, and there was nothing. I'm sitting on the front row, and there's nothing going on. And the only sign that I saw that something was wrong was Mike was doing this. Well, had a guy working for me by the name of Tom Helms. And Tom Helms had been approached by this author wanting to make a grand entrance of his manuscript that was finished. Wanted it to be a big. And here's the thing about it: nobody at Lifeway even knew about the manuscript. He had this perspective that everybody was waiting on it. Nobody had it. And not only that, they dress up a clown. What was that guy?
I successfully hid this person's identity for you for the rest of my career at Lifeway. But
you don't have to tell me the identity, but what was he dressed up like? A pizza delivery boy?
He was dressed up like a pizza delivery guy.
He looked more like a clown. And he comes waddling in. Special delivery for Thom Rainier, special delivery. And we're all there. And I found out later that there are all these texts going on. Oh my gosh, he is so fired. And it was just, and the serious thing, and he's there and he's waiting on me to come up and receive the pizza box that has the manuscript.
Oh dear.
And so I go up there and look at it and just, I think I muttered something like, "Thank you. Y'all are dismissed."
Oh dear.
My mistake on that was, of all chapel services, I did not have my phone with me. And I don't know why. I was probably charging it somewhere, and I couldn't stop it. I didn't know what door he was coming in. I knew who had him, and I knew who it was. I knew what was going to happen, but I couldn't stop it. It was like watching a wreck in slow motion. I knew I was dying. But anyway,
in that, you're right, that those type of situations in local church can quickly erode trust.
Yeah.
And so there, you got to have that humility as a person who's highly unstable.
I don't think you spoke to me for a couple of weeks after that. I think
it was a lot longer than that. I knew that look, here's the reality. I knew that if I spoke, I'd probably explode. So
I'm glad you guys had a Paul Mark reconciliation. I'm glad you guys are back, and I'm glad to hear this. So maybe someone's listening to this and they're living in that right now. There's hope. All right, there's hope as well.
Jess wants to get us back on track since we're on the side of town, and we haven't gotten to all of our points yet. But this whole thing of recruiting, Mike, it's important in any ministry, but gosh, in music, worship, it's not only important, it can be one of the biggest frustrations.
Well, it's huge. And as a matter of fact, I'll mention this in the My Church staff ministry that we're doing right now. We're just starting this worship cohort where we're training worship ministry leaders. I spent a lot of time in this material talking about this issue of recruiting and training and keeping volunteers, because it is an art that you learn how to do over the years. Volunteers are the lifeblood of any ministry. The scripture tells us that our job is to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And so we're in the business of developing people to do this. Now add the dynamic of, we have a very specific language that we use to do the ministry that we're doing. So not everybody can speak this language, and not everybody can speak it as well as others can. So not only we can't do, anybody wants to come and be the lead guitar player, y'all come on. We can't do that. We have to qualify, we have to equip, we have to train. So we have to have a way to make the ministry interesting and give opportunity to outsiders. But then what do we do with them once we have them? How do we develop them? And then what seats on the bus do we allow them to sit in? How do we navigate all kinds of musicianship levels? Here's one of the paradigms to consider, because there's a lot of things to consider. But there are a couple of different models of worship leadership ministry in churches. And I wouldn't tell you this one's better than that one, but there's this artist model where you get it's a small circle of people. And I'm not talking about church size. I know some churches that are mega churches who have a very small worship leadership team, but they have an artistic model. So they're after something. When they talk about their worship values, really high on their value list is the professional or off the scale production value, what they're doing. Well, to get that, and maybe it's because they have a large media ministry, or maybe for whatever reason, they're after this artistic thing where every service sounds like a live record almost. Well, you can't have a whole lot of volunteers around. That's part of that. You have to have a highly selected group that grows together over time musically, and then you get this amazing thing. That's an artistic model, and there are churches that do it that way, and I would never fault them for that. Now, I'll also say the expectation is that group is not going to be a disciple making group. More than likely, it's going to be a highly selected, trained group of professionals, if you will. In most settings, though, that's not what you're going to have. You're going to have a shepherd model. And the shepherd model is that if Bubba wants to sing, you find a way for Bubba to sing. Or if, this guy plays trombone in high school when he was 17, now he's 85, but he wants to join the orchestra and he's still got the same trombone. I mean, so the variables there are as wide as you can imagine them. Mm-hmm. And the guy leading that ministry has to have a sense of how to attract people into this ministry, and then how to equip them, and then how to use them in the right places where they win and they actually contribute and not become a distraction to it. And there is so much to do with this. And a disciple maker that's leading worship ministry is doing this all the time. I've got a whole session in my church staff material,
and I talk about. Since we got to speed it up a little bit, Mike, okay. I need to just pause for a moment. And right now, right here, we're way past the midpoint. I need to thank Cheney again. Cheney and Associates is our sponsor. They are the people who are the accounting firm for the church. And look again in the show notes. I love the work that they've done. I've got many churches that are raving about them. I talk to pastors a lot, and it's just a great firm. And we just want to thank Cheney and Associates for doing what they're doing. Now, Mike, I want to get back and let's get these other ones done. I want to get back and finish this about the ability to recruit and maintain volunteers, and then we'll go quickly to the other three as well.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is the lifeblood of ministry. As a matter of fact, I would say if you are a church musician and you don't love developing people and training volunteers and recruiting volunteers, if that's not a passion for you, you probably should be in an artistic model, because you're going to be totally frustrated in a church if you're not able to do this or not willing to do this well.
But I would bet that 1% are that type of church. It's going to be hard to.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Or should be that type of church. So this is an important skill set to add to your arsenal as a church leader.
And Mike, you mentioned my church staff. I want to put that into our show notes. You are a part of a new ministry at Church Answers, where essentially we're helping you to add the minister of music or worship to your church, either by mentoring someone who's currently there or helping you to find someone that you will mentor. So you're taking a lot off the plate of the pastor, because you're working with this person, and you can only work with 25. We have it limited, and you're working with this person, and you're helping the church to add a qualified worship leader, minister of music. It is $100 a month from Church Answers. Now, they can choose to get a volunteer or just someone part-time or whatever, but you're providing that ministry and service every single month to this person. So give us a quick overview of that.
Yeah, I was so honored and blessed that Church Answers asked me to do this, be the champion for my church staff. I'm meeting with these people every month. I have a resource every month that I point to that helps them in some aspect of worship ministry, and I'm training them in different aspects. You could even think of it as a mentoring kind of relationship with these individuals, where month to month I'm talking about things like recruiting and training volunteers. I talk about worship planning tips. I talk about how to build a theological framework underneath your ministry that helps you make decisions. Is it this song? Is it that song? Well, a theological framework underneath that will help you make those kind of decisions. I talk about how to develop values for your ministry that you then execute against those values in pursuit of them. And they're going to be as unique as every different context. So think of this as an opportunity to have a mentor for your worship ministry leader who comes in and helps develop them and train them and equip them to do it better and to be more accountable to a really specific set of goals that they're set for. And this process, the My Church Staff process, is helping these worship leaders develop this. I've said for years, most church leaders aim at nothing and hit it every Sunday. Mm-hmm. And what a shame that is. Yep. This is an opportunity to help your worship leaders not aim at nothing, but to really identify what they're after in worship ministry. And if you aim at nothing, how will you know if you ever hit it? Or
And
maybe you do know
we've made this affordable really for any kind of
Yep.
church. And the thing about it is, if you have a good worship ministry, this type of ministry will take care of itself in
Yeah.
the financial aspect of it. So I encourage you, if you're looking for improving your current worship ministry, or if you are looking to find a worship leader and you need Mike, not to go find that person for you, but give you some guidelines
Yeah.
on what to look for and to take a lot off of the pastor's plate, go to the link on my worship staff, not my worship staff, my church staff, and you have the worship part by it, and look at that. And we've got a few openings left in Mike's area. Grab it while they're still there.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to do the next to last one, then I'm going to turn the last one over to Jess. Mike, we're going to combine two at this point, just because we're a little short on time. But a good conflict manager and unifier in the church, those can kind of go together. What worship leader has not heard a complaint about a song?
Every Sunday. I mean,
Every Sunday.
there's no way a worship leader is going to be in a church and not experience at least some conflict or at least some question about the choices that you have to make. The variables are just too many. And any worship leader that's leading their ministry to avoid conflict, that's their goal, they're going to have a very tepid and probably not much impact in their ministry. So you're out there, you're planning, you're working with your pastor, and you're going to have conflict. It just comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you do that? Well, this person needs to acquire some skills, and some of these skills are developed that would be applicable to every church leader. But one of the things I learned along the way, again, wishing I could do the first two churches over, is the ability to lead and to influence with great questions. You know that Jesus in his ministry asked, somebody counted them, 134 questions that are in the red letters. He used questions more strategically than any other leader that you'll ever study. And I've tried to learn the skill of leading with great questions. So, for instance, a guy walks up one Sunday and says, "Man, I don't like those songs you're doing." And I remember I said to him, I said, "Well, you know what? If you can't believe in what I'm doing, could you believe in what I'm trying to do?" And he kind of looked like, and I said, "If you would give me a few minutes tomorrow morning, I'd love to explain to you what I'm trying to do." And I was able to meet with this guy and say, "Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's why I chose that song. Here's why I'm using this particular group of instruments, et cetera, et cetera." And when I was able to sit down with him and give him the why, the conflict evaporated quickly. So not every conflict story is going to end as good as that one did for me, but the ability to not be insulted when you're questioned, when you put your song out there and somebody says that I didn't like that song, well, and you wrote it. I mean, I've had that experience. You've got to be able to not be sensitive about that, but also aim for something higher and using some great techniques. That's one of the things I talk about in my church staff in our worship board.
Once again, you can see that link. So Jess, you finish us up.
Well, just real quickly on this, we combined a good conflict manager and a unifier in the church. I also think this is really important because, and I am not, I wish I had music ability. I don't. I joke all the time that I wish I would be on the worship team. I have my egg shaker. I'm ready to go at a moment's notice, but they never call on me. One thing I've noticed with our worship team is that conflict within the team can happen very quickly because it feels so personal, because what you're dealing with are people's abilities, and that's what's being rated. I mean, it's not like we have three pastors up there and we're all trying to preach a sermon and we're all trying to do it together at the same time and we're like, "Oh, you don't need to be doing that." It feels like this ministry has the ability to have internal conflict very fast. So just real quickly, Mike, on that, is that true from an outsider's perspective? If you're a worship leader, do you need to be able to identify that, like make sure you don't have conflict, even though it feels very personal?
No question. I mean, it is a seedbed for conflict inside the team, and it becomes very competitive. I mean, these people were in high school band, and they used to have to audition every other week for their chair and be force ranked in their section. That's what they're used to as musicians. So it does turn into American Idol sometimes, and what a shame that is. That's why the leader has to lead spiritually, aspire for more in a discipleship standpoint, to set different goals and different targets and take the competition off the table And one of the things I love to do when you have a lot of people around you in a worship ministry, you can make roles interchangeable and make sure that nobody owns anything. That's not her song. That's not his guitar. That's not. But none of us own any
That's
of this.
good.
This belongs to something greater than that, and really have to model that as a leader, or it absolutely it breeds conflict if you don't.
Yeah, that's good. Well, our last characteristic we're looking at here, and we've touched on this, transparency and healthy communication skills. I think this goes internally, externally. It goes within the leadership team. It goes. Just any final comments on that? I know we've kind of hit it, but anything else you would add?
Yeah,
To
I'll add one more thought. The worship ministry participants have to be intentional about not being isolated from the rest of the church. Because of the uniqueness of the music space, musicians can isolate themselves unintentionally. We have our own language, we have our own rehearsal, we have our own everything, and we can be so isolated. So one of the ways to combat that, the transparency and the communication aspect of that, is you want your worship ministry leaders to be great church members. They're not leaving after the music and going sitting in the green room and watching the TV for the final song. They're actually on the front row with their. They become great listeners. They support the sermon, the preaching ministry of the church. They're on the mission trips. They're teaching small groups. They're in every way serving the larger body of believers. And when you have a worship team that is engaged in the whole ministry of the church, every once in a while, I used to tell ministers of music this, every once in a while, put an apron on, get in the food service line on Wednesday night and dish out the mashed potatoes. If you'll do that, they'll listen to you and follow you as a worship leader even more. So be great church members, and that will help with a lot of those issues.
You have been listening to the Church Answers podcast with Jess Rayner and Thom Rayner, and a special interview with the worship guru, Mike Harland. You really, if you have not signed up already, let me encourage you to sign up for my church staff. You can see the link in there. It's basically you're getting a staff member, and the charge from our perspective is $100 a month, and you're getting so much information. And Mike will have office hours, virtual office hours. He'll have what we call Church Answer Central, a dedicated thread where he's always responding to you. There's so much to it, and it's going to improve the quality of the type of leaders in this position, which will improve the quality of worship, which will bless the church, and God will be glorified.
Amen.
So always, first of all, Mike, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Enjoyed it, except for that little trip down the pizza box lane. Anyway,
you brought it up. I finished it.
I know, I did.
And thank you, Jess, and thank you, audience, for being a part of this. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, will you give us a thumbs up and say you like us? Maybe subscribe to us or tell others about us. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting app, give us a rating and review. Make it good. Let's get the word out, because this is a free ministry that is sponsored by Cheney and Associates. I've mentioned them already, but I'll mention them again. They are the accounting firm for the church. Thank you again for watching the church and listening to the Church Answers podcast. We will see and hear you on the next episode.